So gardening with moonlight in mind. So if you are a professional like I am and you're working from 9 to 5 or maybe even a little bit later, this is really kind of a gardening strategy that might be really effective for you. This actually goes back all the way to, archaeologists have found, at the Taj Mahal, where gardens were set up for evening enjoyment, particularly with beautifully scented flowers. And that's one of the major things that we're going to be talking about this morning. So where to begin? So we need to start, as we do with all gardening, with an envisioning process. So where do we want this garden to be? How large do we want it to be? What are the other things that are in the local area? So we begin with that envisioning. So that's that location. For this, we're actually going to be talking a little bit about what we refer to as hardscape. So that's going to be some of the furnishings and some of the other things that are going to be appropriate. Lighting, of course. And then the biggest thing, the reason that I'm here, of course, is to talk about the plants. So when we think about the location, so one of the things we want to think about with an evening garden is actually placing it maybe around the patio, maybe around the deck, close to the house, so that you can enjoy it. So you're not, if you think about it, if you put it far from the house, you're really not going to be able to see it in the moonlight because obviously the moonlight is nice and soft. The other advantage about putting it around a porch, a deck, or a patio, of course, is that those fragrances can waft into the house. So if you have a three-season room, for example, and you're able to open it up. So what about those sort of furnishings? So you want them to be durable, you want them to be comfortable. So it can be something like we see here, which is a swing on a front porch. It could be a rocking chair. It could be wicker, it could be rattan. What it should be is durable. It should be comfortable. And that's one of the things. So when we're thinking about gardening with moonlight in mind, we're really talking about setting a mood, setting a place where you can unwind and enjoy at the end of the day. You can do that with putting cushions there, of course. Think about having a table so that you have a place to maybe put something to drink, maybe a light snack. If you're in a city area, and there's lots of ambient noise from the traffic going down the road or, the trampoline 3 doors down. One of the things you might want to think about is adding a water feature. And the great thing about a lot of these water features is many of them are now solar. So you're not going to be making a commitment necessarily to be putting in a major electric line, because I know all of us, the idea of water and electricity, at least for me, makes me go, eek. Maybe not something I want to try to do myself. And they can be large, like you see here. But remember, they're also tabletop-sized water features. And these are just going to give you that light dabbling sound to help drown out that local background noise. Can also take the appearance of a bird bath. So one of the things that we know that actually increases bird activity in a yard is actually having a water source. So good for you and good for them. But do remember that if you have water, it should be moving and it should be changed regularly so we're not inviting mosquitoes, because that's something that would certainly mess up our evening enjoyment. And we need to think about lighting. So lighting has a couple of different applications. So first is safety. So if you're a klutz like I am and you're likely to trip on uneven stones, that lighting is going to help you with that safety aspect. But lighting also sets an atmosphere. And just like with water features, many of these are now solar, so you can put them at varying distances. Many of them are low wattage LEDs. And so those are going to give you some control over what that lighting looks like. And of course, they come in a whole variety of sizes and shapes, as you can see here. The other thing to think about is if you're not using solar, but you're actually using something that's going to be hardwired in, choosing something that's either got a motion detector or a timer. And that way those lights go off when you don't need them. Repurpose your Christmas lights. Particularly if you have white lights, you can actually, as you see here, can wire them up into an umbrella. So that's going to give you just enough light to eat by, but not so much as to upset your mood. And then there are things like this. So there are fairy lights, there are lanterns. These two are going to create that soft glow. And so that's going to give you just enough light to see by and to really create that atmosphere. Any questions before we move from the hardscape side of things, which is not my forte, into the plants that are? All right. So when we think about plants, there are a number of features we need to think about. So number one is going to be fragrance. So these are going to be things that are going to be inviting all of your senses. So as the light dims, and of course now that we have crossed the summer solstice, what do we all know? Those days are going to be getting shorter here in the not too distant future. We're going to recognize that. Looking for things that actually naturally bloom at night and things that are going to be reflecting light. So we're going to start with one of my favorites to start with. And so when we think about designing a landscape, we generally think about starting with our large elements first, then moving to our medium-sized elements, and then to our small ones. And so this is Sweet Bay Magnolia. Beautiful lemon fragrance. So many of you are probably familiar with the magnolias that bloom in early spring. And while those are lovely, what do we often know? They often get frosted, right? This doesn't bloom till generally about that second or third week of June. Flowers, as you can see there over on the left, kind of throughout the canopy, but has the wonderful benefit of many of these magnolias that it will continue to produce flowers intermittently throughout the summer. So you'll be able to get that sweet, light smell of lemons. Beautiful white flowers, as you can see here, almost look like they are sculpted. So this is going to be a plant probably, there are two forms actually. So there's a more shrub-like plant that's going to be in the 12 to maybe 15-foot range, but you can keep smaller than that. And then there's actually a tree form that'll go up to about 20 or 25 feet. So if you're looking for a small tree, this is a great small tree. Just look for a single-trunked variety, not a multi-trunked as you see here. That kind of tree, the one thing, so it will take a wet site, it will take a clay soil. The only thing it requires is that we have an acid pH. And so when you're doing that initial, where am I going to locate my garden, that's the thing to think about is, do we have an acid pH or can I create that kind of environment? Because if we don't give this plant an acid type soil, what we're going to see is the fact it's going to suffer from iron chlorosis, where the leaves are actually yellow and the veins are green. But you can see just how lovely it is in bloom. It'll bloom for usually about 2 to 3 weeks, continuing to throw those flowers, typically at the ends of the branches as you see here. This also has the added benefit of basically two-toned leaves. So those leaves are about 4 or 5 inches long and about 2 inches across. The top side is this really beautiful glossy dark green that you see, but the underside is silver. And when we're talking about something that's going to be beautiful at night, so you can imagine the breeze blowing through and you're going to get that reflected silver light off of the undersides of those leaves. So that's Sweet Bay Magnolia. It's a wonderful plant. I often recommend it for folks to put near their patio just because of how wonderful it smells.
Does it do well in shade?
So this is going to want probably at least partial sun, which means about 6 hours of sun or so a day. So this one does not have any fall color. So one of the things when we're selecting plants, of course, is we want to think about, do these plants have multi-season interest or is this a once and done? So this doesn't have any fall color, unlike our next candidate, which is Japanese Stewartia. So this is definitely a 4-season tree. And this too is a tree. So this is going to be in that 25 or so foot range, as you can see from the picture on the left. So that's a flower bud that you see there. And actually, typically is in bloom right now. Now this year, because we've been so warm so early, and as we know, everything's running, it's still about 3 weeks ahead of time. I missed getting this plant in full bloom by about 10 days. I was so disappointed because I had hoped to give you pictures of a plant either from Holden Arboretum or from Kingwood. And in both places, like I said, I had missed it. So the picture on the left comes to us courtesy of a garden, so you can see how they can be clustered together. The picture here on the right is the one that I took last Thursday. So 5 petals. So this is actually very closely related. It's in the tea family, but really valued because of its blooming in summertime, so generally a time when we don't think about trees blooming a whole lot. That's its fall color, folks. Yeah, oh wow. And when I was at Kingwood late last October, I saw the red color before I actually wandered over to figure out what it was. And then once I got over to it, I realized that it was Stewartia. So beautiful, intense red color. But this is what we call a four-season tree, because even after the leaves fall, of course this is a picture I took just the other day, you can see how beautiful the bark is. So this too requires a more acidic soil, loves a pH of around 6 once again, and good organic matter. But Japanese Stewartia certainly is one of those plants probably most of you have never heard of, but one maybe based on the color you might want to think about. Close cousin to Japanese Stewartia is Franklinia. So Franklinia is native to the United States. In fact, unfortunately no longer exists out in the wild, but we've been able to maintain it through nursery production. And this one blooms generally starting about the week before Labor Day. And it'll be in full bloom for Labor Day and into the week or so beyond. Same kind of leaves, very long, probably in the neighborhood of about 6 inches in length, about 2 inches in width. But I'd say that's a pretty spectacular flower too. Give you that sort of color. This is going to be slightly smaller, so where the Stewartia is going to be 25 or so feet, this is probably going to be closer to maybe 15 to 20. It's a little bit smaller in that regard. Same kind of beautiful anthers in the center, really nice white color. This too will actually have fall color, so this will turn kind of a wine color very late in the year. So this one is one people often worry about because it's very late to leaf out and very late to lose its leaves. So while most of our other trees, including our oaks, already have a full complement of leaves, the leaves on the Franklinia are still going to look quite small, and you're going to say, is there something wrong with it? Why is it so late? But it's completely natural for it. So those are 3 examples of small trees that you might want to use to anchor your landscape design. We're going to move into some shrubs now. So this is glossy lobelia. Characterized from those beautiful star flowers. This actually will bloom from fairly early in the summer, well into September. Known for its sweet fragrance. So these are very sweetly scented. Beautiful arching habit, as you can see. Fairly easy to control in terms of size. So generally when we think about shrubs, one of the things everybody always asks is, how big is it going to be? We can take advantage of the fact that this is going to be generally around 4 foot or so in height, but if we need to keep it a little bit lower, we can. With that arching habit, it's probably not going to get much taller than that because those branches are just naturally going to arch. But let's say you have something you want to hide. So let's say you want to hide the garbage cans because you won't want to be sitting on your deck and looking at them. Let's say you've got an air conditioner unit. These are great kind of plants for helping to hide some of that. Flowers will come either in pink or in pure white. Beautiful kind of purple stems, very small leaves. So sometimes we worry about the size of the leaves and the leaves actually causing us a problem down the line. These are going to actually do quite well and compost up quite quickly. It gets the same glossy lobelia because it keeps that gloss on those leaves throughout the growing season. Summer sweet. So this is one that will be coming into bloom really soon. So this is Clethra alternifolia. And I only say that because there are several plants that have common names that sound very similar to summer sweet. I love this plant. You can see it's got beautiful panicles of flowers, but this is another multi-season plant in that it turns that beautiful golden fall color. So depending on the selection, this is going to be between 3 feet and 6 feet, depending on if you want one of the large ones or one of the dwarf ones. You can see what that foliage looks like. So again, we're talking about a leaf that's going to be about 4 or 5 inches in length and about 2 inches in width. But that's the shot because it's coming into bloom now. So what do we think of? We have all this massive bloom in spring and maybe even into late spring. And then our gardens are nothing but green. Well, here's an example of something that's going to be blooming now. Very sweetly scented. So this is going to smell of vanilla, of lemons, and of honey. Very attractive to pollinators. I'm not sure which shot I've got, but some of my shots I have been photobombed by bees, hummingbird moths, actual hummingbirds, as well as butterflies. So during the day, we're going to have all of those lovely things. And at night, the fragrance actually intensifies. So this is a great plant to put by your 3-season room and open up those screens so this fragrance can waft in. You're also going to see a whole host of moths coming to feed on the nectar that's being released. So there is one of them that's out there is called vanilla spice, so it's not quite as pure white. But that's one of the things when we're thinking about what kind of flowers really do well for us to see at night. It's going to be those things that are white or light colored. So many of our gardens are dazzled with oranges and reds and purples, and those are beautiful. But as the light decreases, the purples, the blues, the reds, they blend into the background. It's going to be the whites, the silvers, the pale pastels that really come to the fore. So you can see how white the straight species is as opposed to that cream color for vanilla spice. These panicles are about 12 to 18 inches, so you actually can harvest some of them and actually bring them into the house to enjoy as well.
How large do those get?
So the dwarf varieties are going to be in the 3-foot size. Most of these are going to be probably around 5 or 6 foot. When you cut the panicles back, of course, they're going to be a little bit shorter than that. And so these panicles are about 2 inches in diameter and about this long, as opposed to Virginia sweetspire. So this blooms a little bit later. So this is kind of end of July, beginning of August. Very arching, as you can see, very refined panicles. So these are going to be maybe 3/4 of an inch across, maybe about 4 or so inches long. Once again, beautifully fragranced, blooming at a time when few other shrubs are in bloom. The picture on the right is actually taken from my own yard, plant that I truly love. This is one that will actually take partial shade to deep shade. So if you have a deep shade situation, this will actually still grow and bloom. The more sun you give it, the more dense those panicles are going to be. Very small flowers, about half the size of what we would have seen with clethra. And here, of course, is yet another insect photobombing one of my photographs. But that just kind of gives you an idea of what you're going to be inviting to the garden. The other added benefit of Virginia sweetspire, check out the fall color.
For the summer sweet,
Mm-hmm.
kind of does it like full sun, shade?
Full sun to part shade. So definitely it would prefer to have somewhere between 6 and 8 hours of sun. So Virginia sweetspire, the better the color is, the more sun it gets. So these pictures were taken down at Kingwood last fall, and you see just how beautiful that red color is. Every bit as good as some of our invasives. So if we're looking for an alternative to burning bush, to me that red is every bit as good, and this happens to be a native. Oak leaf hydrangea. So hydrangea particulata, that gets all the hype and everybody goes ooh and ah. But this is actually quite nice in bloom right now. In fact, just finishing up blooming. Pyramidal panicles. Gets its name from the oak shape of its leaf. Can bloom very densely, as we can see here. A couple of other examples of various places. So pretty much any place I go, whether it's a library, a public garden, I'm always looking to see what folks are using in their landscape and where we might be able to deploy this. This too is going to invite a whole host of various pollinators, but those large flowers actually do reflect the moonlight quite nicely. It too has multi-season interest. So this is going to give you beautiful red fall color. And even after those leaves fall, you can see over there on the left that you're going to see bark that's naturally shreddy. So this is one of its characteristics. And so it's going to be giving you that, once again, that 4-season look. So this one is going to be, about this tall, about 3 to 4 feet. Another one that we actually can control the height pretty well. So we don't really need to worry too much about that. If you have a big space, and this is one that you really need a larger space for, this is bottlebrush buckeye. Full bloom right now. Typically I would have said it should be in bloom in about a couple of weeks, but definitely in full bloom. This is going to be in the 8 to 10 foot range. So if you want to screen off the neighbor in the back because you just can't look at their trampoline one more day, this might be a good example for you. Panicles are going to be in that foot to 16 inches. Kind of give you an up close. You can see how it gets its name, bottlebrush, from those extended anthers, giving you kind of that brush-like appearance. This is one that will attract swallowtail butterflies, painted ladies, all of those kinds of beautiful things, as well as a host of other pollinators. But one that really looks quite nice from a distance in the evening. Good thing about this too is, unlike a lot of our other buckeyes, this does not develop blotch or scorch. So its foliage remains beautiful and green and will eventually turn a beautiful gold in the autumn. But we shouldn't think just solely about flowering plants. So we actually can use variegation as part of the equation here. And so I threw in this one. So this is variegated blood twig dogwood. And you can see how we've got the white edges along the leaves along with purple. Since most of us know this as a plant that we would use at Christmas time for its red stems. But here's an opportunity to use it in a garden that's going to be reflecting that light. There's an up close of those variegated leaves. I will tell you that with variegated plants, and I'm going to reiterate this a couple of times this morning, it's really important that we put them in their best location. So variegated plants are a bit like me. If you put me outside in the full sun with no sunscreen, I am going to scorch and burn. Variegated plants do as well. And so this is an example of a plant that we want to make sure we're giving at least partial shade to, otherwise it will definitely scorch. In fact, this one will take dappled sun, partial sun, even into light shade all day. Any question about the shrubs before we move into a couple of vines, and we're going to start talking about some other things?
How are these against deer? I got crossbow. There's no not having deer in my house. So.
Most of these things are not going to be deer resistant, depending on the intensity of your deer predation. Yeah. So, I know many of you have heard me give this equation. I look at the whole deer resistant question kind of as I'm putting out a buffet. And if I lay out this beautiful buffet and I've got pasta salad and I've got fruit salad and I've got all this beautiful food, and I forget that I dressed the tossed salad and left it in the kitchen, and all of my guests come and they eat and they eat, and I walk into the kitchen and go, oh, I forgot this, and I take the now wilted tossed salad and put it out on the table. If somebody comes late to my buffet, they might eat it. That's deer resistance. So there are things that deers are going to choose first right off the top. And then there are going to be things that are going to be less and less likely to eat. But given the intensity of a lot of our deer populations, there's probably nothing that's truly deer resistant, unfortunately. So have any of you ever seen this? This is moonflower. So moonflower is a first cousin to morning glory. But unlike morning glory, this one usually starts opening about 4 or 5 o'clock and is open all night long. Huge flowers, about 6 inches across. This is a vine, so this is going to be growing somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 feet in the course of a growing season. This is an annual here. So if we were down south, this would be a perennial, but it's definitely an annual up here. So you can use it going up a post. So if you've got a post for your patio, that might be a possibility, particularly if you were to line that post with some chicken wire. I'm going to tell you, you're going to have it well anchored because this is going to get pretty heavy. Beautifully, once again, another one that's beautifully scented. So one of the things that we find with the plants that bloom in the evening is that in order to attract their native pollinators, they need to release a lot of scent as we go into the evening. So here are a couple of examples of how folks have utilized moonflower. So you can see it going in across the railing of the house, beautiful archway there. Just a really beautiful and wonderfully scented flower, and great, as I said, great big flower. So makes a big impact.
Does it come in any other colors besides white?
I don't believe so. And remember that because it's white, it's going to be reflecting that moonlight and making sure it's drawing in those pollinators. But 4 o'clocks might meet your need. So 4 o'clocks are going to come in a variety of pastel colors as well as white. So as the name would imply, they start opening around 4 o'clock. In days that are cooler and overcast, you're going to open maybe a little bit earlier. And days that we have a lot of intense heat and sun, they may not open until later. This too is a vine. So this is another one where you're going to have to be giving support to. And you just need to be aware. Both the moonflower and 4 o'clocks are things that you can start from seed. And so you're going to want to start these sometime in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 weeks before our last frost, which generally is the third week of May, but you know, some instances all bets are off as the climate continues to evolve. But as you can see, really beautiful colors. This too is going to be drawing in those pollinators from all over your yard. Tuberose. So this is very similar to dahlias in terms of how we would handle this. So this is a very tender bulb, so you're going to be making a commitment for this one. So you're going to have to dig this up and bring it in and hold it during the winter. But you can see just how beautifully sculpted those flowers are.
Can you take these, instead of drying them, if you will they translate to being a house plant in the winter?
I don't know if these would translate to being a houseplant. I think they probably need that rest period. As you can see, these come in cream and light pink and white. Another one this one smells of, they say, of cherries and almonds. So quite lovely. Panicles here are generally going to be in that 6 to 8 inch range. Once again, you can use this as a cut flower and keep it trimmed. So we know that by continuing to do that, we're actually going to be encouraging the plant to continue to bloom throughout the season. And this will bloom from midsummer, probably the middle of June, well into early September.
Do those like shade?
Full sun. And mature clumps for this are going to be somewhere going to be in that 2 to 3 foot size. If you have a dry sunny spot, this might be something to think of. So this is evening primrose. So we've talked a little, we've had some annuals, we've had a tender perennial. This happens to be a biennial, which means the first year it's basically going to produce a nice little green rosette plant that's not going to look like a whole lot in your garden. It's going to be that second year when it's going to produce those beautiful yellow flowers. So this is an earlier bloomer. So this is going to be blooming in June. That's one of the other considerations when we're thinking about gardening for moonlight, as we would think of for all gardens. We need to make sure that we have flowers coming throughout the year. So various heights, various times, that we actually have something unique and lovely to look at each and every time we're out in the garden. Regal lily. So this is tall. So think about this as probably about 5 foot. Trumpet, so might remind you a bit of an Easter lily, very fragrant. However, if you have a cat, this is not a plant for you because this plant is toxic for cats. But just something that's absolutely, you can see how large those flowers are. Each flower will last somewhere between 5 and 7 days, depending on what the weather is like. And we can have as many as 10 to 15 flowers on a single stem. So if you have clusters of 3s or 5s, you can see the flowering impact you can get from a regal lily.
Would it be toxic to chipmunks?
Unfortunately, no. Many of us are facing problems with our 7-striped friends. And so this is heliotrope. So probably something you're not as familiar with. This is another one that smells of vanillas and cherries. Usually grown as an annual here. It will get up to 2 to 4 feet tall. It does really, really well in a container. You can see how it has those beautiful 5-petaled flowers. To me, it looks like the sort of flower I've been drawing since nursery school. But you can see the kind of floral impact that we're talking about. Certainly something that will get your attention in the garden. It's tolerant to drought. It's tolerant to heat. Brittany, this one is for you. Deers don't like them. Comes in everything from white to pale lavender. They were admired. This is what they might call an old-fashioned plant, in that it was something that our grandmothers would have recognized in their gardens. Now our plants are going to be shorter, more floriferous, and blooming for much longer. So it is important that you do keep this trimmed up so that you're keeping off all of those flowers. This is another one that if you have small children, if you have pets, best to avoid this one because all parts of this plant are toxic. So this is definitely one that you don't want to be engaged with eating, and that's one of the things I always put into my presentations, that if we do have concerns about toxicity, that you are aware of what those might be. Night phlox. Have any of you ever heard of night phlox? So many of us are familiar with the standard phlox, right? This, as evening and twilight begin, it unfurls its petals one at a time like a snowflake. At least that's how it's described in all of the literature. This one is going to smell of almonds and honey, white on the top and almost glistening. So it's got this reflective nature in some of the cells of its petal surface. The underside is of a maroon color. So this is a short guy. So this is one that you actually want to put up closer. So this is going to be in that sort of 12-inch range, but one that just has an absolutely gorgeous fragrance. And I think those petals are quite unique and quite beautiful. So when we think, yes, Kelly?
Is that an annual or a perennial?
Here it would be touch and go. So if you've got a very warm microclimate, we probably can eke it through if we mulch it.
Okay.
For the most part, I'm guessing that in an exposed situation here in Lake County, we're going to lose it.
Okay.
Pinks, and so probably most of us think of pinks. So this is a really, really short guy. So this is going to be one that's going to be maybe in that 4-inch range. So this is going to be great for a border edge. You might think about how we're stacking these plants forwards and backwards. So this smells of cinnamon, as do all members of the carnation family. Memories happens to be pure white, and because it also has very silvered leaves, it really fits in well with our thoughts about gardening for moonlight. Just a really pretty little guy. Veronica. So this is another one that if you have a larger space, if you have a semi-shaded space, this is one that will do well with that. Leaves are going to be 1.5 inches to about 3.5 inches long. Overall, the whole plant's going to be probably about 2.5 feet tall. You can see how it blooms from the bottom up. As with many of these things that we've seen today that have these panicle-type flowers, these are going to be things that are going to be attractive to a lot of our pollinators because it gives them a landing platform. Sweetly scented, comes beautifully in white, and just another good example. So this happens to be another one of those. This Probably would make it through our winters, but if we get a really severe one, we might lose it. Brunera. So we've been talking mostly about plants that have beautiful white flowers. Here's one that has a frosted like leaf. So this is Jack Frost, as the name would indicate. So most of that leaf is white to silver. So definitely a shade-loving plant, so this is not going to tolerate sun. With most Brunera, so the common name for Brunera is Siberian bug loss. It really needs a new common name. Talk about rebranding. This is a plant that needs rebranding. The flowers should remind you a little bit of forget-me-nots. Beautiful, light blue. And this comes in a whole range. So I chose this cultivar because of its foliage. But Brunera, you can find everything from an entirely green leaf to a leaf that's variegated along the edge to this one that's variegated, as you see. And a beautiful mound. So we're talking about something that's going to be 12 to maybe 14 inches in height. Blooms in spring, so blooms in May. But really here we're not really talking about taking advantage of those flowers so much as taking advantage of that beautiful foliage.
Would that do well under pine trees?
So part of it's going to have to do with your commitment to a little bit of supplemental water. So remember that tree's root system is going to be sucking up lots of water, and if you're willing to give it just a little bit more, you're going to be able to eke it through. Brittany, do not plant this one. This is deer candy. I mean, you might as well just call this salad, but you can see with something like Patriot, as that moonlight comes up, as the light from the day recedes, the white from the edges of these leaves is really going to be quite intense. Obviously a plant that's going to require full shade because of its variegation, but one that really is going to do quite well in that gardening for moonlight. Variegated Solomon seal. So this one is going to be 18 to 24 inches tall. Blooms in spring, but once again we're really not so much talking about these flowers, which even though on their own are quite lovely, it's going to be that variegated foliage that really is going to be the attractive feature throughout that growing season. Another one that does really well in partial to full shade. Does well actually in dry shade as well, so think about putting something under a pine tree. This might be one to think about. Caladiums, so these do really well in containers. Depending on the cultivar of caladium, getting one that's going to be mostly white like this. If you've got containers on your patio, for example, this might be a good addition. Remember, caladiums, like some of the other things we've talked about, are going to require commitment. You're going to have to dig these up, bring them in, and hold them over the winter. Lamb's ears. So one of the other things we think about, so we've talked about fragrance, a little bit about texture. So the beautiful silver is going to be reflecting the soft light of evening, but it's been proven that by stroking things that are soft, it actually reduces our stress level. And so if you've ever felt lamb's ears, this certainly qualifies for that. A couple of things to bear in mind with lamb's ears: we do need to keep them pinched and don't let them flower because that's going to keep them compact. Most of the time we have no problem overwintering this. This is a hardy perennial for us. But we have known if you have a really wet site, it can get root rot. So just be aware of that. Licorice plant also kind of falls into that same category of having both fragrance. If you crush these leaves, it's got that sort of anise, licorice sort of fragrance to it. Best to put this in a container so that it doesn't go places where you don't want it to go. As with many members of this particular family, they can spread beyond their bounds and not be good neighbors. But just a wonderful plant for both its fragrance and its texture. And an annual that falls into that category as well is Dusty Miller. And so this is going to be giving you that silver to white look. This is another one. So this is in the aster family. So this is going to want to flower and send up these tall spikes. Keep it pinched, keep it branched. You can definitely keep it down at a foot, 16 inches if you want it that short. But once again, you can see how that light color is going to be easily reflecting that moonlight. And not to short shrift some of our other more common things. So you can see here is an example of using white in patients. And so we've got it here lining this pathway. So if you've got a shaded area around your patio, that might be appropriate. If you have sun instead of shade, using a white petunia in the same way would also be an appropriate choice. And of course, this is something that we can change. You know, if we decide that gardening for moonlight, well, maybe isn't quite what we thought it was going to be for us. Maybe we're in the garden more during the day and we like some of those beautiful salmons and oranges that I talked about. You can obviously easily make those changes every year. If you have hanging baskets, I know many of us on our patios and decks do, think about something like an all-white fuchsia. So those flowers are going to be reflecting that color at night as opposed to our common fuchsias that are going to be red with purple centers. And finally, if you really want to make a commitment, and so some of you I know who have traveled down south are probably familiar with night blooming jasmine. And of course, jasmine has a fragrance all of its own, and certainly something that's valued by the perfume industry as well as by us. You can see just how tiny those tubular flowers are, and hopefully you've noticed as we've been going throughout this that many of the flowers we've looked at have been tubular. That's because as we think about the pollinators that come, particularly the moths, they need that tubular type flower in order to be able to feed. Intensely fragranced. Down south it would be a small shrub, neighborhood of 2, 3, 4 foot tall. Here, if we're trying to grow this, we'd actually have to make the commitment to having lights in the house to keep it going, because this one is one, it needs a zone 8 or warmer, unfortunately. Flowers look kind of just softly white here, but with jasmine, it's all about that beautiful scent. And finally, gardenia. So when we talk about magnolias, gardenias, jasmine, I'm immediately picturing someplace down, maybe in Charleston, right? But gardenias too have a wonderful fragrance, acid-loving plant. So the same sorts of requirements that you might see with a rhododendron, for example. So lots of organic matter, very acid soil. This is another one that would be a shrub down south. Here we can actually grow it as a small annual in a container on a patio, for example, in the summer, if we're not willing to make that commitment to trying to hold it over. The biggest problem we would have is being able to give it enough light throughout the winter to keep it going. That's my contact information, and I think on the handout that all of you have, you've got my contact information. I wanted to leave enough time at the end to be able to answer any other questions that you might have, or any other gardening questions you might have in general.
I have a question.
Sure.
This was lovely, by the way. The trumpet vine nightmare of my neighbor. I have beautiful full sun, but her trumpet vine is right up against the fence that I built to kind of push it back, and she doesn't keep up with it. And all I can do is take my hedge trimmers and keep cutting it back, but it keeps popping up in my yard. And then if I plant a bed, it's now growing in my front bed and my side bed. Any help at all? And she's a lovely neighbor, and I want to keep it that way, so I just bite my tongue.
I think you're going to have to bite your tongue and pull your weeds, unfortunately. Many of these things can be quite aggressive.
Right.
And short of us having a really harsh winter that might kill back some of what's underground, I mean, we haven't had one of those for the last several years. It's going to continue to spread. Be careful to avoid taking mulch from along the fence and putting it someplace else in the yard, because you don't want to be essentially propagating this. Other questions?
All right, I'll ask a question. Forgive me if I'm redundant. What is the easiest, best smelling shrub or flower that will grow in like 75% shade?
I would go with IT. I would go with Virginia Sweetspire.
Yeah,
So that would be the shrub I would choose, because that's going to give you color, it's going to give you fragrance, and it will tolerate. And I know it will tolerate heavy shade because that's where mine is growing. So
okay, thank you.
other questions?
What was the Latin name for the summer sweet use?
Oh, Clethra alternifolia. And with summer sweet and Virginia sweetspire, I always give the Latin names because if you go out to the garden center or wherever it is that you do your shopping, there are a host of plants with very similar common names. So this is an example of where reading that tag is going to be really important.
I have an area outside my back of my house where there's a little walkway, cement walkway. But what's been happening is all the soil, especially because it's sandy, has been eroding into the sidewalk. Is there anything that I can plant around the bed to stop that? I had bushes, small bushes, that worked, took them down, that was dumb. I tried plastic edging, that didn't work. Now I tried little pieces of wood, that's not working.
Really what you need are plant roots because they're going to hold that soil in place. Full sun, part sun,
Probably full.
full sun. Potentillas might be a good choice. So because you said full sun and sand, and potentillas, you can keep those at 12 to 18 inches. They bloom from generally June to September. Small, they're in the rose family. So kind of have that sort of light, small rose-like flower. But they would have a really good root system that might be able to hold that soil in place. Anybody else? Well, I appreciate everybody coming out on a Saturday morning. I was wondering whether anybody was going to be here at all given the holiday. So I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.